Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl. Today I'm doing the Snob O Meter Tag. This tag was created by That Reading Guy, and I was tagged by Reading Ideas. Number 1, what is your definition of book snobbery? I guess I would just say if you think that you are better than other readers because of what you read versus what they read, or even if you just think that your opinions are the only ones that are correct or right, I guess. Number 2, is there a genre or type of book you would never consider reading? Such as, would you ever read a romance, or if you regularly read romance, would you ever try a science fiction novel? A book I would never consider reading? Yes. And I would say that throughout my life, I've probably read most kinds of literature. I don't think that there's anything snobby about having things that you won't read. I think it is important for everybody to have convictions about themselves. Obviously, that can be different for everybody. But for me, I won't read erotica or open door romances, I guess. I just have no interest in that. I won't read horror books that are full of the occult or anything like that. And I don't like books, whatever genre they are, that are really, really excessive vulgarity or language. I try to give content warnings if there is language in a book I've read, and I can handle some language. I never like it, but I can handle some of it. But there are times when it gets excessive. And it may not be that the book itself is bad. I don't want to read a lot of cussing over and over and over again throughout a whole book. Number 3, does erotica count as literature? Well, I think it does, because literature, I believe the definition of literature is, the written word. I think that any book counts as being literature. I think that a lot of times the word literature is reserved for whether it's good literature or not. And that's up to interpretation. I personally don't think erotica is good literature, but I couldn't say that it isn't a book if it's a book. I have my opinions about whether it is worthy of reading personally or not. Number 4, is it better to read classic books than popular bestsellers? I don't think so. This is one of the areas that I think that snobbery can tend to come out. Are people that think classics have nothing valuable to say and only read contemporary, or people that think that there is never any contemporary book that lives up to a classic and won't read any contemporary books. I don't tend to enjoy a lot of contemporary books, but that's not because I don't think they have worth. It's because a lot of times they tend to be the books that do have a lot of swearing and content issues that I don't want to read about. And the ones that tend to be in the genres that I do like, that are things I'm more comfortable with, they tend to just not be as enjoyable for me as other books are. So I don't read a lot of contemporary, but I don't think that it's worse than a classic. And in fact, I think there's a lot of contemporary books that are better than a lot of classics. While I would personally be more drawn to classics than contemporary, I think that such a broad statement of only classics count is too broad of a statement. It's not always true. Number 5, have you ever bragged about reading a classic in order to sound smart? I don't think so, but I don't have a perfect memory. So, maybe when I was younger or in high school when I was reading things that my friends, I didn't have any friends that were readers then. So there might have been a time or two when I did that, but I don't think so. I think I have been proud of certain books that I've read when I found out that other people weren't reading those. But not in like a prideful way, just like I'm really glad that I prioritize this, or I'm glad I have that experience. I'm glad that I'm able to understand references that other people make because of having read it. I don't know if that makes sense, but no, I don't think I've ever bragged about it. Number 6, do audiobooks count as reading? I think so. I've heard people argue this before. I read books out loud to my daughters all the time for homeschool. And I count those books in the list of literature they have read that school year. And then they have books that they are reading on the page themselves too. But I don't differentiate. I just put them in the list. And I do the same thing with audiobooks that I listen to. I guess you're not, reading it with your eyes, but I think it counts as reading. What about comic books or graphic novels? Yes, I think those count too. I think that we can get really legalistic about this kind of stuff. And I think it all counts. And I think that all of it can be good. I don't think it's a great idea to villainize one format of reading. I can't read ebooks. I just can't. But do I look down on people who read ebooks instead of physical books? Why would I? I think it's just worrying too much about things if we decide that comic books or graphic novels or audiobooks don't count. Number 7, have you ever looked down at someone for reading a popular fluff book? A book with little substance to it. For example, a self-help book or a celebrity memoir. No, I have not. And hopefully not many people answer this with yes, because I read a lot of celebrity memoirs. Over the last couple of years, I've kind of decided I must be a nosy person because I really love reading about people's lives. Whether that's a celebrity, whether it's an everyday person, a historical figure, I enjoy reading about people's lives and seeing how different people live, finding out how people got to where they are. I find that really interesting. I think that I have read some celebrity memoirs that I would consider more fluff books and others that have been really deep. So, personally, I think you can kind of decide that for yourself, but I wouldn't consider all celebrity memoirs fluff, or even all self-help books as fluff. I think that also when I think of self-help book, I think of a certain kind of book that are kinds that I don't read, but I read other books that probably are considered self-help books because it's just learning and teaching about things that help you to be better in certain areas of your life. I think that this can be another tricky one, what a fluff book actually is. So I think there have been times in my life where I have found out a certain book was somebody's favorite book, and I thought, really? That's your favorite book? I wasn't looking down on them necessarily. It's just, I'm surprised because maybe I think it's not a very good book. And I'm sure people have thought that of me. But I think one thing that keeps me from doing this is that I don't think there's anything wrong with reading books that are just for fun sometimes and don't have a lot of depth to them. I don't think every middle grade book needs to be teaching kids these big life lessons. I think that those ones are awesome, but I think that there needs to be some room for middle grade to just be fun. And I don't think we have to outgrow that as an adult. I think that adults should be able to read for pure enjoyment of a story that's funny or, silly or whatever, sometimes too. I just don't want to ever take life so seriously in every way that I have to be so serious about everything I read, if that makes sense. And I think also, we used the Good and the Beautiful language arts for homeschool for quite a few years. I've talked about how it kind of ruined my youngest daughter's love of reading because when she was little and she had just learned how to read, she always had a book. And I had a thing written on social media once that said the only thing that she would grab faster than a book was a cookie. And while funny, it was true. She was always carrying around a book. She was always reading. And we started homeschooling and I thought that would only get better. But over the couple of years, it started getting worse where she didn't want to do it anymore. And now she just doesn't really enjoy reading. But every once in a while, she'll get a book that she really loves. But the reason for that was because in The Good and the Beautiful, while I do think that it's a strong academic curriculum, in many ways, there's so much emphasis on perfection in the books, of the characters being perfect and it not being, she calls them a roller coaster book that she looks down on. Every single book that my kids would read was either a classic or a contemporary that was written in a certain way. And I don't know how to describe it exactly, but if you've read any of them, you'll know. And so while there were some that we came across that were really good, she just was reading book after book after book that she wasn't enjoying, and I didn't pick up on it soon enough. So I think that when I think of the looking down on somebody for reading a fluff book, I think about that. I think about how you hear the word twaddle thrown around, such a negative idea of books that are just meant to be enjoyable. And when we are so legalistic about that, instead of the things that really matter about what kind of books we're giving our kids, I think it can be a really negative thing. So I would try to have the same viewpoint toward other people, that by calling something a fluff book, like in a negative sense, and just saying, if you're talking about what you've read and I say, yeah, this was just kind of a fluffy book, but I liked it. But if I'm talking about somebody else and I say, oh, they only read fluffy books, and I look down on that, I just think that that's taking the fun out of reading and out of also learning from other people and seeing what other people like. That was very rambling. Hopefully I made sense. Number 8, have you ever been the recipient of someone else's snobbery? Going back to The Good and the Beautiful, I went to, I don't know if it was the very first convention or if it was just the second, but I'm pretty sure it was the very first convention they ever did, was right before I started homeschooling. And that's how I went to it, because my sister is really good friends with Jenny Phillips, the woman who created The Good and the Beautiful. Her best friend used to work for Jenny Phillips, and she gave me a discount on the ticket. I went to the convention and I was sitting at a table with women I didn't know. There was one talk about books. And this was the first time I encountered Jenny Phillips the way she talks about books and her viewpoint about books. So they were talking about how you shouldn't be reading certain kinds of books. And I said to the table as we were discussing, I'm like, I disagree. My daughter, and I was speaking of my oldest daughter at this point, when she was little, she loved the Rainbow Fairy books. Those, if you're going to call a book fluff, that's going to be it, right? There's not much to the story, very formulaic, simple vocabulary. They're meant for little kids. And she breezed through those. There were so many books in that series, and she just read all of them and read them over and over and over again. And she was reading so much that it was building her reading skills. It didn't matter that they weren't, great literature. They were building her reading skills. Once she went to public school, she had one of the highest reading levels. So she was an incredibly strong reader right from the get-go. And that actually helped. Those books helped her. Later on, she was reading Jane Austen. She's reading classic books. She has a very wide range of reading. Even to this day, at 19 years old, she still can read the, hardest, best classics and still likes reading Pokemon manga. And I think that there's something to be said for that. So as I was telling these women this, if looks could kill, I got the stink eye from every single woman at that table but one. And she was being very quiet. So I don't know if she just was nicer or if she agreed with me but didn't want to say that. I don't know. So that was a one time for sure. Then I have a friend who I would say is a book snob, and I think she would say she's a bookish snob. And there have been times in our friendship over the last 16 years where I knew she was looking down on me or others for the books we were reading or that were our favorites. But we were good friends, so it really didn't matter. I wasn't offended. She wasn't trying to be mean. And I'm sure that on here, there's people that watch my videos that think that there's things I read that I shouldn't read, or that I don't read enough of something that they would consider good. So number 9, would you ever be friends with a snob? So I guess I already answered that. Yes, I have a really good friend who is for sure a snob. Number 10, are people who don't read less sophisticated than people who do? I wouldn't say so. I think that can be true, but I wouldn't say that every reader I know I would consider sophisticated necessarily. I don't think I'm always sophisticated. And there's so many things in culture that make you cultured. There's probably people that don't read ever, but they're going to art museums and they're going to plays or operas or whatever. There's so many different ways to enjoy sophisticated culture, I guess. But also, I don't think everybody needs to be sophisticated, so I don't know that matters. Number 11, measure yourself. Based on your answers to the previous 10 questions, would you qualify as a book snob? I don't think so. I think everyone would benefit from becoming more of a reader. And I wouldn't say I'm snobby about it, but I do think that I think everybody should be a reader. I wish that everyone I knew was a reader. So I would say I don't qualify as a book snob, but I think I probably have book snob moments. And I think that that's probably the most honest answer that most of us probably would have. That we have book snob moments, but overall, we're not a book snob. So hopefully that's true. I don't think I'm going to tag anybody because I know a lot of people have done this, but if you haven't done it, consider yourself tagged.